The dust from the departing stagecoach still hung in the air when Josephine Grayson stepped onto the wooden planks of Riverton's Main Street, her heart hammering against her ribs as she clutched the telegram that had brought her back to Wyoming after 3 long years away. She had left this town as a girl running from heartbreak, and now she returned as a woman who had finally found the courage to face what she had abandoned. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on her dark traveling dress, but the heat was nothing compared to the burning question that had consumed her every waking moment since receiving that cryptic message from Martha Henderson, the general store owner who had been like a second mother to her. "He needs you. Come home." Josephine's hands trembled as she adjusted her bonnet and picked up her worn leather trunk. The street looked much the same as it had in 1881 when she had fled in the dead of night, too afraid to face the consequences of her own cowardice. The saloon still stood on the corner, its painted sign faded but readable. The blacksmith's forge sent plumes of smoke into the clear blue sky, and there, at the end of the street, stood the small white church where she had once dreamed of getting married. Josie Grayson, is that really you?" She turned to find Martha Henderson rushing toward her, the older woman's round face flushed with exertion and relief. Martha pulled her into a fierce embrace that smelled of cinnamon and soap. "I got your telegram," Josephine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What happened? Is he hurt?" "Your message said, 'Not here,'" Martha interrupted, glancing around at the curious faces peering from shop windows. "Come to my place. We need to talk privately." Josephine followed Martha down the familiar streets, her mind racing with possibilities. James Anderson. The man she had promised to marry. The man she had left standing at the altar 3 years ago because she had been too terrified of becoming like her own mother, trapped in a loveless marriage, slowly withering away in the harsh Wyoming territory. But running had not brought her peace. Boston had been everything she thought she wanted: culture, society, opportunities for an educated woman, but it had felt hollow without him. Martha's home was a modest 2-story house behind the general store. Once inside, the older woman poured them both coffee and sat down heavily at the kitchen table. "He has been waiting for you," Martha said simply. "Every single day for 3 years that man has been waiting." Josephine felt tears prick her eyes. "I do not understand. I left him. I humiliated him in front of the entire town. Why would he wait? Because he loves you, you foolish girl." Martha's voice was gentle despite her words. "After you left, he went through a dark time, stopped coming into town much, threw himself into working his ranch. But about a year ago, something changed. He started wearing his wedding band." "What?" Josephine's coffee cup clattered against the saucer. "But we never married." "He had the rings made, remember? He wears his every day now, says it reminds him of his promise. And whenever anyone asks him about courting or remarrying, he just says he is already married in his heart, and he is waiting for his wife to come home." The room spun slightly, and Josephine gripped the edge of the table. "Martha, I do not deserve that kind of devotion. I broke his heart. I broke my promises. Maybe not, but love does not always operate on what we deserve." Martha reached across and squeezed her hand. "He is out at his ranch right now, the old Peterson place about 5 miles west. He bought it 2 years back, fixed it up real nice. You should go to him." "I cannot just show up after all this time." "Why not? You came all the way from Boston. 5 more miles should not stop you now." Josephine sat in silence for a long moment, gathering her courage. Finally, she nodded. "Can I borrow a horse?" Already saddled and waiting out back. "I had a feeling you would want to go right away." The ride to the ranch seemed to take both an eternity and no time at all. Josephine's borrowed mare moved at a steady pace across the rolling Wyoming landscape, past fields of wild grass that rippled like waves in the breeze. The mountains rose purple and majestic in the distance, and the sky stretched endless and blue overhead. This land had always felt too big, too wild, too uncontrollable to her younger self. Now, riding through it with purpose, she understood why James had always loved it so fiercely. The ranch house came into view as she crested a small hill. It was a beautiful structure, clearly built with care, a 2-story home with a wide porch, corrals and barns spread out behind it, and a small garden plot to one side. Smoke curled from the chimney despite the warm June afternoon, and several horses grazed peacefully in a nearby pasture. Josephine dismounted near the porch, her legs shaky from both the ride and her nervousness. She tied the mare to the hitching post and stood there for a moment, trying to decide if she should knock or call out. The decision was made for her when the front door opened. James Anderson stood in the doorway, and Josephine's breath caught in her throat. He had always been handsome, but 3 years had transformed him from a young man into someone weathered and solid. His dark hair was longer now, curling slightly at his collar. His jaw was shadowed with stubble, and new lines creased the corners of his eyes. He wore simple rancher's clothes, worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. And there, glinting in the afternoon sun, was the gold band on his left hand. They stared at each other in silence. Josephine watched a parade of emotions cross his face: shock, disbelief, hope, fear. His hand moved unconsciously to his wedding band, thumb rubbing across it in what was clearly a habitual gesture. "Josie," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "Hello, James." Her own voice wavered. "Martha said you needed me." A bitter laugh escaped him. "Martha is meddling, but she is not wrong." He stepped out onto the porch, and Josephine could see he was trembling slightly. "I have needed you every day for 3 years. I am sorry," she whispered. "I am so sorry for what I did to you." "Come inside," he said after a moment. "We should not have this conversation on the porch where any passing rider could hear." She followed him into the house, immediately struck by how warm and comfortable it felt. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace, handmade furniture, and windows that let in generous amounts of light. It was the home of a man who had built something solid and lasting, not the temporary dwelling of someone just passing through. James gestured to a chair at the dining table and took one across from her. His hand rested on the table between them, the wedding band impossible to ignore. "Martha told me you wear that now," Josephine said, nodding toward the ring. "That you have been wearing it." James looked down at his hand, and a ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I put it on one morning and realized it felt right, like it was always supposed to be there." He met her eyes, and the intensity in his gaze made her heart skip. "I was waiting for you to come back." "How could you possibly know I would come back?" "I did not know. I hoped, I prayed, I kept faith." He leaned forward slightly. "Why did you leave, Josie? The real reason, not the note you left that just said you could not do it." She had known this question would come, had rehearsed 1,000 answers on the train from Boston. But now, sitting across from him, only the truth seemed adequate. "I was terrified," she said quietly. "My mother married my father when she was 18. He was a good man, but she always told me she felt trapped. She said the West was beautiful but brutal, and that being a rancher's wife meant endless work and loneliness, and watching your dreams die a little more each year. I loved you so much, James, but on our wedding day, all I could hear was her voice telling me I was making a mistake, so I ran. You could have talked to me, I know that now, but I was 20 years old and scared out of my mind." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I thought distance would make it easier. I thought I could build a different life in Boston, but every day I was there, I felt like I was living someone else's story. I taught at a girls' school. I attended lectures and concerts. I met educated men who wanted to court me. And none of it mattered because I had left my heart here with you." James was silent for a long moment, his thumb still moving across his wedding band. "Do you know what the worst part was?" he asked finally. "It was not the humiliation or the gossip or people pitying me. It was knowing that the woman I loved did not trust me enough to share her fears, that she thought so little of what we had that she could just disappear." "I was wrong," Josephine said urgently, leaning forward. "I was so wrong, James. I broke both our hearts because I was a coward. I know I cannot undo what I did, but I came back because I finally understood that running away from fear is not the same as being free. I came back because I love you. I have loved you every single day we have been apart." He stood abruptly and walked to the window, his back to her. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. I built this house for you, he said quietly. Every nail I hammered, every board I placed, I imagined you here. I made the kitchen large because you always said you wanted space to bake. The bedroom upstairs has windows facing east because you loved morning light. There is a reading nook by the fireplace because you always had your nose in a book. He turned to face her, and she saw tears tracking down his face. I built a whole life around a ghost, Josie. I turned down good women who wanted to marry me. I sat alone every night in a house meant for a family because I could not let go of you. Josephine stood and crossed to him, her own tears flowing freely now. Then stop living with a ghost. I am here, I am real. I am yours if you will still have me. If I will still have you. His laugh was choked. Josie, I have been yours since the day we met at the church social when you were 16 and I was 18, and you argued with me about whether horses or cattle were more important to Wyoming's economy. I have never stopped being yours. She reached for his hand, the one with the wedding band, and held it between both of hers. Then marry me, James Anderson. Do it right this time. Let me stand up in front of this whole town and pledge my life to yours. Let me prove that I am not running anymore. He pulled her into his arms, and she felt 3 years of loneliness and heartache dissolve in the strength of his embrace. He buried his face in her hair, and she felt his tears mixing with her own. I have dreamed of this moment 1,000 times, he whispered. I was so afraid it would never come. I am here now, she promised, and I am not leaving ever again. They stood there for a long time, holding each other as the afternoon light slanted through the windows and the sounds of the ranch settled around them. Finally, James pulled back enough to look at her face, his hands cupping her cheeks gently. I want to do this properly, he said. Court you the way I should have before. Let you be sure this is really what you want. James, I traveled halfway across the country to get back to you, I am sure. Even so, you have been in Boston for 3 years. That is a long time. Maybe you have grown accustomed to city life. Maybe living out here on a ranch will feel different than you remember. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. I need to know you are choosing this life with your eyes wide open, not just running back because you are lonely or nostalgic. There was wisdom in his words, even though every fiber of her being wanted to protest. She nodded slowly. What do you propose? Stay with Martha for a few weeks. Let me court you properly. Come out here and see what ranch life really involves. Meet the hands I have hired, see the work that needs doing, and if at the end of that time you still want to marry me, then we will set a date and do it right. And what about you? She asked. What if you discover that the real me cannot live up to the memory you have been carrying? He smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. Then I will fall in love with the real you instead, though I suspect she is even better than I remembered. They sealed the agreement with a kiss that was both tentative and filled with promise. When they finally parted, James insisted on riding back to town with her, not wanting her to make the journey alone. As evening approached, the next 3 weeks were a revelation. James called on her at Martha's house every morning, bringing small gifts, wildflowers, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, a pretty ribbon for her hair. They took long walks through Riverton, talking about everything they had experienced during their time apart. She told him about Boston, about the girls she had taught, about the museums and theaters and how hollow it had all felt. He told her about building the ranch, about the struggles of the first year, about the satisfaction of finally making the land profitable. He was honest with her about the hardships. Ranch life meant early mornings and late nights. It meant dealing with unpredictable weather, difficult animals, and the constant worry about money and survival. It meant isolation during the harsh Wyoming winters, with only each other for company for weeks at a time. I will not lie to you and say it is easy, he said one evening as they sat on Martha's porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. There are days when everything goes wrong, when a horse breaks a leg or a storm destroys fences or you lose cattle to disease. There are nights when I lie awake worrying about whether I can make the mortgage payment. And are there good days too? She asked. His face softened. More than I can count. Days when you ride out across your own land and feel like the luckiest man alive. Days when you help a mare give birth to a healthy foal, or when you sell your cattle at a good price, and know your hard work paid off. Days when the mountains look so beautiful it almost hurts, and you understand why this land gets into your blood and never lets go. Josephine listened carefully, weighing his words against her own fears. She asked to visit the ranch regularly, and he agreed, showing her every aspect of the operation. She met his ranch hands, two young men named Tom and Billy, who treated James with obvious respect and who accepted her presence with friendly curiosity. She watched him work with the horses, his hands gentle but firm, his voice calm and steady. She helped in the garden, learning which plants thrived in Wyoming's temperamental climate. She even tried her hand at cooking for the men, producing meals that were adequate if not inspired. One afternoon, about 2 weeks into their courtship, a summer storm rolled in fast and fierce. Josephine had been at the ranch helping to preserve vegetables when the sky suddenly darkened and the wind picked up. James rushed in from the fields, shouting orders to Tom and Billy to get the horses into the barn and secure everything loose. "You should get inside," he told Josephine, his hair already plastered to his head by the driving rain. "Let me help," she insisted. "Josie, I am not fragile, James." "Tell me what to do." He looked at her for a moment, rain streaming down his face, then nodded. "Help me get the chickens secured and make sure all the windows are shuttered." They worked together in the storm, moving quickly and efficiently. Thunder cracked overhead and lightning illuminated the ranch in stark flashes. By the time they had everything secured and stumbled back into the house, they were both soaked to the skin and breathing hard. James grabbed towels and wrapped one around her shoulders. "You did well out there." "A lot of ranch wives freeze up in emergencies." "I am not a lot of ranch wives," she said, her teeth chattering slightly from the cold. He smiled and pulled her close, sharing his warmth. "No, you are not." They stood by the fire as the storm raged outside, and Josephine felt something settle inside her. This was not easy, comfortable life she could have had in Boston, but it was real, it was challenging, and more importantly, it was life she wanted to face with this man beside her. "I do not need more time," she said quietly. James looked down at her, water still dripping from his hair. "What? You said to give it a few weeks, to be sure, but I am sure now, James. I want this life, I want this ranch, I want you." She reached up and touched his face. "I am not afraid anymore. The 3 weeks are not up yet, I know, but I have spent enough time running from what I want because I am scared of what might go wrong. I want to start running toward something instead." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, his hands tangling in her wet hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me this Sunday," he said. "I cannot wait any longer." "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, absolutely yes." The news spread through Riverton like wildfire. Josephine Grayson, the woman who had left James Anderson at the altar 3 years ago, was back, and they were getting married. The town's reaction was mixed. Some people were thrilled at the romantic reconciliation, while others muttered that James was a fool for taking her back. Josephine held her head high through the gossip, knowing she deserved some of it but refusing to let it derail her happiness. Martha helped her prepare for the wedding, lending her a beautiful cream-colored dress that had belonged to her own daughter, who had moved east years ago. It was simple but elegant, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Josephine stood in front of Martha's mirror the morning of the wedding, hardly recognizing the glowing woman staring back at her. "You look beautiful," Martha said, adjusting the small veil, "and happy, really happy." "I am," Josephine admitted, "terrified but happy." "That is how you are supposed to feel on your wedding day. The terror means you understand how important this is. The happiness means you are with the right person." The wedding took place at the small white church at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Josephine walked down the aisle alone. Her parents had both passed away years before, but she did not feel lonely. The church was packed with townspeople who had come to witness the union, and their faces ranged from skeptical to supportive. But none of that mattered when she saw James standing at the altar in his best suit, the wedding band already on his finger. His eyes locked on her with such love and devotion that her own tears started falling before she even reached him. The Reverend, An older man named Pastor Williams, who had known them both for years, spoke about second chances and the grace of forgiveness. He talked about love being a choice as much as a feeling, and about the commitment required to build a lasting marriage. When it came time for the vows, James took both of her hands in his. "Josephine Grayson, I have loved you since the moment I met you. I loved you through 3 years of separation. I loved you even when I did not know if I would ever see you again. I promise to love you for the rest of my days, through whatever hardships or joys life brings us. I promise to be patient when you are afraid, strong when you are weak, and steadfast when the world feels uncertain. You are my wife in my heart, and now you will be my wife before God and these witnesses." Josephine's voice shook as she recited her own vows. "James Anderson, I left you once because I was too afraid to trust in love. I will never make that mistake again. I promise to choose you every single day. I promise to build a life with you here in this wild, beautiful land. I promise to be your partner in every way, to share in your work and your dreams. You waited for me when you had every reason to move on, and I promise I will spend the rest of my life proving that your faith in me was not misplaced." Pastor Williams smiled as he pronounced them husband and wife. "James, I believe you have been waiting for this moment for quite some time. You may kiss your bride." James pulled her into his arms and kissed her as the church erupted in applause and cheers. Josephine felt tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of joy and relief. She was finally where she belonged. The reception was held at the town hall, with tables laden with food that various townswomen had contributed. There was music and dancing, and Josephine found herself swept into conversation after conversation. Some people were genuinely warm, welcoming her back to the community. Others were more reserved, clearly waiting to see if she would stay this time. One older woman named Mrs. Fletcher, who had been friends with Josephine's late mother, pulled her aside during a lull in the festivities. "Your mother would be proud of you," Mrs. Fletcher said quietly. "I know she filled your head with fears about ranch life, but that was her own disappointment talking. She made her choices for her own reasons. You get to make different ones." "Thank you," Josephine whispered. "I wish she could see that I understand that now." "Maybe she can, Mrs. Fletcher said with a small smile. "And either way, you are here making your own path. That is what matters." As evening fell, James and Josephine said their goodbyes and rode back to the ranch together under a sky full of stars. The house looked warm and welcoming with lamps glowing in the windows, and Josephine felt a swell of emotion as they dismounted. "Welcome home, Mrs. Anderson," James said, scooping her up in his arms to carry her over the threshold. She laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I could get used to this." He set her down gently once they were inside and immediately pulled her close again. "I still cannot quite believe you are really here, that you are really my wife." "Believe it," she said, reaching up to touch his face. "I am not going anywhere." They made love that night with a tenderness and passion that spoke of years of longing finally fulfilled. Afterward, lying in the big bed in the room he had built with her in mind, Josephine traced the line of his wedding band with her finger. "Tell me about when you decided to start wearing this," she said softly. James was quiet for a moment, his fingers trailing through her hair. "It was about a year after you left. I was in town and I saw a couple getting married at the church. The groom looked so happy and nervous, and all I could think was that should have been us. I went home and found the rings in my drawer where I had thrown them that awful day. I took mine out and just held it for a while, and I realized that even though our wedding had not happened, my commitment to you had not changed. So I put it on and it felt right, like a reminder of what I was still hoping for. And people must have asked you about it constantly." "Oh, they did. Especially women who were interested in courting. I would just tell them I was already married in my heart and I was waiting for my wife to come home." He kissed her forehead. "Some people thought I was crazy, maybe I was, but I could not imagine giving up on you on us." "I do not deserve you," Josephine whispered. "Yes, you do. You deserve to be loved faithfully and completely. You deserve someone who will not give up on you when things get hard." He tilted her chin up to look at him. "And I deserve you too, Josie." I deserve a wife who is brave enough to face her fears and strong enough to admit when she is wrong. We deserve each other." She kissed him deeply, pouring all her love and gratitude into it. "I am going to make you so happy," she promised. "I am going to be the best ranch wife Wyoming has ever seen," he laughed. "I do not need the best ranch wife in Wyoming, I just need you exactly as you are." The first months of their marriage were an adjustment, but a joyful one. Josephine threw herself into learning the rhythms of ranch life with determination. She woke before dawn to help James with morning chores, learning how to milk the cow, gather eggs, and feed the various animals. She improved her cooking skills through trial and error, producing meals that grew steadily better as she learned what worked in the ranch kitchen. She helped Tom and Billy with smaller tasks, earning their respect through her willingness to work hard and learn. There were difficult days, of course. Days when her muscles ached from unfamiliar labor, or when she made mistakes that caused problems. One morning she left a gate unlatched and 3 horses got out, leading to a frustrating afternoon of rounding them up. She cried from embarrassment and frustration, but James simply held her and reminded her that everyone made mistakes and that he had done far worse when he was first learning. "The difference between a good rancher and a bad one is not whether you make mistakes," he told her. "It is whether you learn from them and keep trying." She also discovered unexpected joys. She loved the quiet mornings when she and James worked side by side, comfortable in silence punctuated by the occasional comment or question. She loved the satisfaction of watching things grow in her garden, of collecting eggs still warm from the hen, of riding across the property and seeing how far their land extended. She loved the evenings when they sat on the porch after dinner, his arm around her, watching the sun set behind the mountains. One evening in late August, about 2 months after their wedding, James came in from the fields looking worried. Josephine was kneading bread dough and looked up at his expression. "What is wrong?" she asked immediately. "Storm coming," he said shortly. "A big one from the look of those clouds. We need to get everything secured and bring the cattle in closer to the ranch. Tell me what to do." They spent the next several hours in frantic preparation. Tom and Billy worked on getting the cattle moved while James and Josephine secured buildings, brought in anything loose that could become a projectile in high winds, and made sure all the animals were sheltered. By the time the storm hit, they were as ready as they could be. The storm was fierce, with winds that howled around the house and rain that came down in blinding sheets. Thunder shook the walls and lightning illuminated everything in stark, frightening flashes. Josephine found herself genuinely afraid as the house creaked and groaned under the assault. James pulled her close, his own face tense. "The house is solid," he said, though she could hear the worry in his voice. "It will hold." They sat together on the floor, away from windows, as the storm raged for what felt like hours. Finally, the worst of it passed, leaving behind steady rain and occasional rumbles of distant thunder. "I need to check on everything," James said, starting to stand. "Not until it is safer," Josephine said firmly, pulling him back down. "A few more minutes will not make a difference, and I cannot have you getting struck by lightning." He looked at her in surprise, then smiled. "Look at you being the voice of reason. One of us has to be." When they finally ventured outside, the damage was less severe than they had feared. Some fencing was down and part of the barn roof had lost shingles, but overall they had weathered it well. Tom and Billy emerged from the bunkhouse, both looking relieved, and the 4 of them spent the rest of the day doing repairs and checking on the animals. That night, exhausted and sore, Josephine and James collapsed into bed. "Thank you for keeping me calm earlier," James said quietly. "I get in my head sometimes during storms, worried about everything that could go wrong." "That is what partners do," Josephine replied. "We take turns being strong for each other." As autumn arrived, painting the landscape in gold and crimson, Josephine realized she had been at the ranch for 4 months and could not imagine being anywhere else. The work was hard, but it was satisfying in a way her teaching in Boston had never been. She was building something real with her hands and her sweat. More importantly, she was building a life with James that felt solid and true, In October, she realized her monthly courses were late. She waited another week, not wanting to say anything until she was certain, but when the signs became unmistakable, she could not contain her excitement. She waited until dinner was finished and they were sitting on the porch in the cool evening air. James was whittling a piece of wood, something he did to relax after long days, and she watched his capable hands work for a moment before speaking. "James, I have something to tell you." He looked up, immediately attentive to the tone in her voice. "What is it?" "I am with child. We are going to have a baby." The piece of wood and knife clattered to the porch floor as James stared at her in shock. "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor, but yes, I am certain." Joy bloomed across his face, transforming it into something incandescent. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, laughing and crying at the same time. "A baby," he kept repeating. "We are going to have a baby. You are happy?" she asked, even though the answer was obvious. "Happy, Josie, I am beyond happy. I am." He pulled back to look at her face, his own eyes wet with tears. "I am complete. You came back to me, we built this life together, and now we are starting a family. It is more than I ever dared to dream." The pregnancy was not easy. Josephine suffered from terrible nausea in the first months, struggling to keep food down and feeling exhausted constantly. James was endlessly patient, taking over more of her usual chores and bringing her crackers and tea when the nausea was at its worst. Martha came out to visit regularly, bringing advice and remedies that sometimes helped. As winter set in, the isolation that James had warned her about became real. Snow fell heavy and deep, making the trip to town impossible for weeks at a time. It was just the four of them, Josephine, James, Tom, and Billy, working together to keep the ranch running and the animals fed. Josephine discovered that she did not mind the isolation as much as she had feared. The house was warm and comfortable, and she and James spent long winter evenings reading together, playing cards, and talking about their hopes for their growing family. She learned to knit, producing somewhat lopsided baby clothes that James insisted were perfect. She also continued her teaching in a way, giving reading and writing lessons to Tom and Billy in the evenings, both young men eager to improve their education. "My ma always wanted me to learn proper reading," Billy confessed one night, his face flushed with embarrassment as he struggled through a passage in one of Josephine's books. "But we were too poor for school and she could not read herself." "You are doing wonderfully," Josephine encouraged. "Reading takes practice, but you are improving every day." James watched these lessons with obvious affection, and one night after Tom and Billy had gone to the bunkhouse, he pulled her onto his lap. "You are still a teacher," he said, kissing her neck. "Just teaching different students now." "I like it," she admitted. "I like helping them learn, and it keeps my mind sharp during these long winter nights." As spring approached and her belly swelled with their growing child, Josephine felt a contentment she had never imagined possible. Yes, ranch life was hard work. Yes, there were days when she was tired or frustrated or scared about the upcoming birth. But she was exactly where she was meant to be. In early April of 1885, with the snow finally melting and the first hints of green appearing on the landscape, Josephine went into labor. James rode through mud and slush to fetch Martha and Doc Morrison, the town's physician, while Tom and Billy paced nervously in the barn. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next afternoon. James stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, and whispering encouragement even as his own face was tight with fear. Finally, as the sun began to set on that spring day, their son was born, a healthy, squalling infant with a shock of dark hair and his father's strong features. "A boy," Doc Morrison announced, placing the baby in Josephine's arms. "A fine, healthy boy." James looked down at his wife and newborn son with an expression of such profound love and awe that it made Josephine's heart ache. He reached out with a trembling hand to touch the baby's tiny fist, and their son immediately grasped his father's finger. "Hello, little one," James whispered. "I am your papa. What should we name him?" Josephine asked, exhausted but elated. James thought for a moment. What about Jacob? Jacob Henry Anderson. Jacob for new beginnings and Henry after my father. Jacob Henry Anderson, Josephine repeated, testing the name. It is perfect. The first months of Jacob's life were a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Josephine was grateful for James's hands-on approach to fatherhood. He was not one of those men who thought childcare was solely women's work. He walked the floor with Jacob when the baby was fussy, changed diapers without complaint, and sang off key lullabies that somehow always soothed their son. Tom and Billy were awkward but sweet with the baby, and Josephine often found one or both of them sneaking peeks at Jacob in his cradle, their rough faces soft with wonder. By the time summer arrived, they had settled into a new rhythm. Josephine managed to balance caring for Jacob with her ranch duties, often carrying him in a sling as she worked in the garden or fed the chickens. James built a small playpen on the porch so Jacob could be outside during nice weather, protected but able to see and hear everything happening around him. One evening in July, after Jacob had been put to bed, James and Josephine sat on the porch watching the stars come out. She was nestled against his side, his arm secure around her shoulders. "Do you remember when you first came back?" James asked quietly. "When you found me here and I told you I had been waiting for you?" "I remember everything about that day," Josephine replied. "I was so terrified you would turn me away. I could never have done that. Even if I had wanted to, which I did not, I had invested too much hope in you coming back." He paused. "Do you have any regrets about choosing this life?" She turned to look at him, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes. "Not a single one. This life is hard sometimes, yes, but it is also beautiful and fulfilling and real. I was living half a life in Boston, James. Here with you, I am fully alive. Even when Jacob keeps us up all night, even when there is more work than hours in the day. Even when winter comes and we are snowed in for weeks, especially then," she said firmly, "because I am facing all of that with you, and that makes all the difference." He kissed her softly, a kiss that held years of love and commitment and promise. "I love you, Josephine Anderson. I loved you when I was waiting. I love you now. I will love you always. And I love you. I am sorry it took me so long to find my courage, but I am grateful you waited." As the months turned into years, the Anderson ranch prospered. James proved to be an excellent rancher with a good head for business, and he and Josephine worked as true partners in every sense of the word. They expanded their herd, added more land, and built a reputation for quality horses and cattle. Jacob grew from infant to toddler to a sturdy little boy who followed his father everywhere, chattering constantly and asking endless questions. In the fall of 1887, Josephine gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Julia Grace. 2 years after that, another son arrived, whom they named Joshua William. The house that James had built for Josephine rang with the sounds of family children laughing and arguing and playing, the clatter of dishes, the murmur of bedtime stories. Tom eventually left to start his own ranch in Montana, though he wrote regularly. Billy stayed on, becoming foreman and like an uncle to the Anderson children. Josephine continued teaching, not just her own children, but also offering lessons to ranch hands and their families. She started a small school in town, teaching twice a week when ranch duties allowed. She also wrote articles for agricultural journals about ranch life from a woman's perspective, finding her voice in ways she never had in Boston. One afternoon in the summer of 1890, 9 years after she had returned to Riverton, Josephine stood on the porch watching James teach Jacob, now 5, how to ride a horse on his own. Julia played nearby with a set of wooden blocks, and baby Joshua napped in his cradle inside. Martha had come for a visit and stood beside Josephine, both women watching the scene with contentment. "You did well, my girl," Martha said quietly. "You built a good life here." "We built it together," Josephine corrected. "James and I as partners. That is the secret, is it not? Partnership. Your mother never had that with your father, and it poisoned her view of everything. But you and James, you work side by side. He makes it easy to be brave," Josephine said. "He believed in me even when I did not believe in myself." As if he heard her, James looked up from the corral and waved. Josephine waved back, her heart full of love for this man who had waited for her, who had worn his wedding band like a promise, who had built a home and a life around the hope that she would return. That evening, after the children were in bed and Martha had retired to the guest room, James and Josephine sat on the porch as they had countless times before. He still wore his wedding band, though it was now accompanied by years of memories and shared experiences. She reached over and took his hand, tracing the worn gold with her finger. "You still think about that day I came back?" she asked. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Though mostly I just think about how grateful I am that you did come back, that you were brave enough to face your fears. I think about it too, about how I almost let fear rob me of all of this." She gestured to the ranch, the home, the life they had built. "About how close I came to spending my whole life wondering what if. But you did not. You came home." "Yes," she said softly, "I came home." As the years continued to pass, the Anderson family became a cornerstone of the Riverton community. Their ranch was known as one of the most successful in the region, but more than that, it was known as a place of warmth and welcome. Ranch hands who worked for the Andersons stayed for years, treated more like family than employees. Neighbors knew they could count on James and Josephine in times of trouble. The children grew tall and strong. Jacob inherited his father's quiet strength and love of the land, clearly destined to take over the ranch someday. Julia was spirited and intelligent, constantly reading and asking questions that challenged even her learned mother. Joshua was the most social of the three, making friends wherever he went and charming everyone he met. In 1895, when Jacob was 10, Julia 8, and Joshua 6, Josephine gave birth to twins, a boy and girl they named Jeremy and Jane. The house was chaotic with 5 children, but it was the kind of chaos that spoke of life being lived fully and joyfully. One evening in the late spring of 1898, James and Josephine celebrated their 13th wedding anniversary. The children were all asleep, and they had the rare luxury of a quiet evening alone. They sat on the porch, a bottle of wine between them, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. 13 years, James mused. It seems like both forever and no time at all. "I know what you mean," Josephine said. "Sometimes I feel like that scared girl who ran away a lifetime ago. Other times it feels like I just came back yesterday." "You are not that scared girl anymore," James said gently. "You have not been her for a long time." "No," she agreed. "I grew up. I learned that love is worth the risk, that building something lasting requires courage, but that courage gets easier when you are not facing things alone." James pulled her close and they sat in comfortable silence for a while. Finally, he spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "Do you know what I think about when I look at my wedding band now?" he asked. "What?" "I think about how it used to represent hope and faith. Something I wore to remind myself to keep believing. But now it represents so much more. It represents every challenge we have faced together. Every joy we have shared, every child we have brought into this world. Every morning I wake up next to you and every night I fall asleep holding you. It is not just a symbol of what I hoped for anymore. It is a symbol of everything we have built." Josephine felt tears prick her eyes. "That is beautiful. You made it possible," he said simply, "by coming back, by choosing this life, by choosing me. And you made it possible by waiting, by believing in us even when I had stopped believing." She kissed him softly. "We made it possible together." As the new century approached, bringing with it changes and challenges to the West, the Anderson Ranch remained a constant. The wild, untamed Wyoming that James and Josephine had known in their youth was slowly being civilized, but their land remained a place where the old ways still held sway, where hard work and partnership and love were the currency that mattered most. In the fall of 1902, Jacob turned 17 and announced his intention to stay on the ranch rather than go east for university, as Josephine had suggested. She was disappointed at first, having hoped he would have opportunities she and James had never had. But watching him work alongside his father, seeing the pride he took in the land and the animals, she realized he had already found his calling. "He is his father's son," she told James one evening. "And his mother's," James replied. "He has your determination and your intelligence." He will make this ranch even better than we did." Julia, at 15, announced her intention to do the opposite. She wanted to go to college back east, to study literature and writing. James was skeptical at first, protective of his daughter and worried about her being so far away. But Josephine championed Julia's dreams, remembering her own yearning for education and experience. "Let her go," she told James. "Let her see the world beyond Wyoming. If she is meant to come back, she will. And if she is not, then we have raised a daughter strong enough to make her own path." "Like her mother," James said with a wry smile. "Yes, but hopefully with better judgment about when to leave and when to stay." As the children grew into adults and began making their own ways in the world, James and Josephine found themselves entering a new phase of their lives. The ranch still required constant work, but with the older children helping and capable hands like Billy still on the payroll, there was more time for them to simply enjoy each other's company. On the 20th anniversary of Josephine's return to Riverton, in June of 1904, the entire town threw them a celebration. It was partly to honor their marriage and partly to recognize all they had contributed to the community over the years. The town hall was packed with well-wishers, and there were speeches and toasts that made Josephine blush and James shift uncomfortably. But what moved them both most was when Martha stood up, now well into her 70s, but still sharp as ever. "I have known these two since they were young and foolish," Martha said to general laughter. "I was there when they first fell in love. I was there when Josephine got scared and ran away, and I was there when she finally found the courage to come home." She looked at them with obvious affection. What James and Josephine have built is not just a successful ranch or a beautiful family. They have built a partnership based on trust and hard work and unwavering commitment. They have shown all of us what it means to fight for love, to wait for love, and to choose love every single day. They are an example to us all. As people applauded, James reached over and took Josephine's hand, his thumb automatically finding his wedding band still there after all these years, still a symbol of everything they meant to each other. The years continued to roll by, bringing both joys and sorrows. They lost Martha in the winter of 1906, and both James and Josephine mourned the woman who had been instrumental in bringing them back together. Billy finally retired in 1908, though he built a small house on their property and remained a fixture in their lives. Julia graduated from college and surprised everyone by returning to Wyoming with a husband in tow, a professor who fell in love with the West and bought land near the Anderson Ranch to try his hand at farming. Joshua decided to study law and set up practice in Riverton, becoming a respected attorney known for his fairness and compassion. Jeremy and Jane, the twins, were inseparable and went into business together, opening a mercantile in town that quickly became successful. Through it all, James and Josephine remained the center around which their family orbited. Their love, forged in separation and strengthened through years of partnership, became the foundation upon which their children built their own lives. In the spring of 1915, Jacob married a rancher's daughter named Sarah, and they took over the day-to-day running of the ranch. James, now 53, and Josephine, 51, found themselves with time to travel for the first time in their lives. They took trips to Denver and San Francisco, even ventured back to Boston so Josephine could show James where she had lived during their separation. "It is a fine city," James said as they walked through Boston Common, "but I cannot imagine living here." "Neither can I," Josephine agreed. "Not anymore. It is interesting to visit, but it is not home." "Where is home?" he asked, though he clearly already knew the answer. "Home is wherever you are," she said simply. "It always has been. I just had to learn that." As they entered their 60s, they settled into a comfortable rhythm of grandparenthood. Jacob and Sarah had given them 3 grandchildren. Julia and her husband had 2, and Joshua's wife was expecting their first. The big house that James had built all those years ago was often filled with the sounds of grandchildren playing, and both James and Josephine delighted in their roles as grandparents. One evening in the summer of 1920, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual they had maintained for nearly 40 years of marriage, Josephine reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Do you ever wonder how things would have been different if I had not run away that first time?" she asked. James considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," he admitted, "we would have had those 3 extra years together, but I am not sure we would have appreciated what we had as much. The separation taught us both something valuable, me about faith and patience, you about courage and what you really wanted from life. So you think it happened the way it was supposed to?" "I think we ended up exactly where we were meant to be. The path was not always easy, but it led us here." He gestured to the ranch, the family, the life they had built. "And I would not change a thing." Josephine leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. His hand found hers, and she felt the familiar shape of his wedding band against her skin. "I love you, James Anderson," she said softly. "Thank you for waiting for me. Thank you for believing in us when I could not." "I love you too, Josephine," he replied. "Thank you for coming back. Thank you for staying. Thank you for building this beautiful life with me." As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they sat together in the peaceful quiet. Two people who had found their way to each other against the odds and had built something lasting and true. The Wild West that had been their youth was fading into history, but the love they shared remained as strong and vital as ever, a testament to the power of faith, courage, and the willingness to fight for what truly mattered. Their story was not one of easy romance or perfect love. It was a story of mistakes and forgiveness, of fear overcome and trust rebuilt. It was a story of partnership and perseverance, of choosing each other every day through good times and hard. It was a story that began with a young woman running from her fears, and a young man wearing a wedding band as an act of faith, and it became a story of a family, a ranch, a legacy that would endure for generations. And on warm summer evenings, their grandchildren would sit at their feet and ask them to tell the story of how they got together. James would look at Josephine with eyes still full of love, and she would reach for his hand, her fingers tracing the wedding band that had meant so much for so long. "Well," she would begin, "it started with me being very foolish and your grandfather being very patient. And it ended with us being very happy," James would add, and it was true. Despite the rocky beginning, despite the years of separation and doubt, they had found their way to a happiness that was deep and real and lasting. They had built a life together in the wild Wyoming territory, raised a family, contributed to their community, and loved each other faithfully through it all. As the years rolled on into the 1920s and beyond, as their children became middle-aged and their grandchildren grew toward adulthood, James and Josephine remained devoted to each other. They were a familiar sight in Riverton, the older couple who still held hands when they walked through town, who still looked at each other with obvious affection, who were living proof that love could endure. And every night before they went to sleep, James would take off his wedding band for just a moment, looking at it in the lamplight before sliding it back onto his finger. Josephine asked him once why he did this, what he was thinking during those quiet moments. "I am remembering," he said simply. "Remembering the hope I had when I first put it on all those years ago. Remembering the faith that kept me wearing it when you were gone. Remembering the joy of finally placing a matching ring on your finger. And feeling grateful that all those years of waiting and hoping led to this a lifetime together." It was a perfect summary of their journey, and it never failed to make Josephine's heart swell with love and gratitude. They lived long, full lives, surrounded by family and sustained by the love they shared. And when people asked them the secret to their enduring marriage, they would smile at each other and give the answer that was true from their very first moments together. "We chose each other," James would say. "Every single day," Josephine would add, and that made all the difference. Their story became part of Riverton's history, told and retold as an example of love that overcame obstacles, of faith rewarded, of courage found. And the Anderson Ranch, still thriving under the care of their descendants, stood as a testament to what two people could build when they refused to give up on each other. In the end, It was not a story about a woman who ran away or a man who waited. It was a story about two imperfect people who found their way to each other, built a life together in the wild and beautiful Wyoming territory, and proved that love, when freely chosen and fiercely protected, could withstand anything the world threw at it. And that was the greatest legacy they could have left, not just the land or the ranch or the family name, but the example of a love that endured, a partnership that flourished, and a commitment that never wavered from the day Josephine walked back into James's life and found him wearing his wedding band, waiting for her to come home.